We can also talk with my guy, Greg Cosell. He joins me every week on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. 45 years at NFL Films. I call him the civilian GOAT, the greatest of all time in terms of breaking down NFL and college game video, game tape that hasn't played or worked for an NFL team. You can check him out on social media at Greg Cosell. I think this week we'll be previewing the NFC South, but I know Greg has some interesting thoughts on some of the quarterbacks that have been in the news lately. Looking forward to talking with the guys about hockey next hour. But Greg, I want to start with Trevor Lawrence because he just got a contract for $55 million a year. And as you and I always talk about, the money is the money.
Yep.
When you think about Trevor Lawrence, and I know you did a deep dive on him recently, what do you see? What do you think about him and being paid at that elite level?
Well, just to start, Ross, as you know, I don't have thoughts or takes. I'm watching the film. So it's these are not takes or thoughts. The film tells you, and the other thing I do, as you probably know, is I talk to coaches as well. So I have great conversations with them about what I see, what they see, and more often than not, it pretty much is the same thing. What I will say is this. When you look at quarterbacks, one thing you have to be very aware of when you talk about their ability to play the position is you have to understand the difference between clean pockets when everything is pristine and a quarterback can drop back and it's clean, there's no one around him, versus what happens when the pocket gets a little muddied and noisy and there's people around him. The really great quarterbacks, those are not factors. They can perform at the same level, Ross, regardless. Lawrence is not quite there yet. Lawrence is a big kid, good arm, not a power arm. Contrary to what people might think, he does not have a power arm. He's got a good arm. One of the issues he has is when he perceives and feels pressure, he starts to play a little faster and he throws the ball not quite as well. So he's got to continue to work on that. People have to remember he's only going into his fourth year. And some might suggest that his first year in the league was kind of a wash because of the whole situation that he played under with Urban Meyer. And it just, it didn't obviously work out. But I think you're dealing with a guy that's really athletic. He actually throws the ball really well on the run, but he doesn't drive the football when there are people around him. And he's going to have to get that figured out. He's a big-bodied guy who tends to be a strider and gets a little elongated in his delivery. So these are just things that he has to continue to work on.
All right, so Greg, but when he came out, whether it was high school or college, I mean, he was talked about since he was maybe 15, 16 years old as being like the next guy. And I guess when I watch him, I don't think he's obviously not Mahomes or Josh Allen. I'm not even sure he's Herbert or Matthew Stafford in terms of physical ability. Because of his early success? Okay, go ahead.
He's not. And by the way, as you know, what he was thought of when he was 15 is not relevant to me, and it's not relevant to NFL coaches. Right now, all Doug Peterson and Press Taylor want to do is get Trevor Lawrence playing at the highest level he can play. Now, he's gifted enough to be a quality NFL quarterback. The question some will have, of course, is can he become one of those top 3 or top 5 guys? That well remains to be seen. And by the way, you don't need a power gun in order to be a top 3 or top 5 quarterback in this league. But there's certainly areas, as I said, where he needs to improve. One thing I do really like about him is he's an aggressive thrower, Ross. When he sees one-on-one outside the numbers, he is delivering the football. And you need to do that in the NFL. It's really hard to be a truly high-level quarterback in this league if you're not going to be aggressive throwing the football.
What about the next 2 guys, Greg, that seem to be up for these big contracts? Tua Tagovailoa, Jordan Love. Do you think Tua is a top 5 quarterback? Do you think he can be a top 5 quarterback? What do you see from Tua?
I would say that Tua is as good a window thrower as there is in the NFL. He has an innate feel for underneath coverage and the timing of throws between and behind coverage. Those window throws versus zone is what separates him from many quarterbacks in the NFL. His sense of timing and anticipation is really, really high level. And so everything about his game is built off that. The question you have to ask yourself, and believe me, this is what this is what coaches talk about, is where do you stand when it comes to the ability to make second reaction plays, make plays outside of the structure, or make plays even late in the down in the pocket where the ball can't come out with timing and rhythm. Now, keep in mind that this is an offense that is totally built on that. And because of the receivers they have and the motion that they deploy, which is far and away the most in the league, very rarely is the timing and rhythm disrupted. I mean, Hill, Waddle, now they'll have Beckham. These guys get off the ball. They're not stopped. They're not pressed. They're not disrupted. So the timing and rhythm is there. So the speed of Hill and Waddle is really problematic. It's tough to play man coverage. It's tough to play single high safety coverage. So therefore, Tua, for the most part, can play at a high level. One point I want to make, because people always talk about deep throws. People have to understand, Ross, a fade is not a deep ball throw. A fade is not an arm strength throw. He's a really good fade ball thrower, but it's not an arm strength throw, and it's not a deep ball throw.
You know what's so interesting, Greg? And we're talking with my guy, Greg Cosell from NFL Films, who joins me every week on the Ross Tucker podcast. It's so interesting because we become so obsessed with second reaction plays.
Right.
And guys that can drive the ball down the field or run around and make plays. And you were saying that that's not really Tua's game.
It's not.
I would say, Greg, for like a decade, the 3 best quarterbacks were Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, and Drew Brees. And I don't really remember seeing those 3 guys make a whole lot of second reaction plays. I mean, most of what they did was getting the ball out quick, timing and rhythm into windows.
Right, but there's one thing, particularly Brees and Brady, more so than Peyton. Peyton's just a different animal overall. But Brees and Brady were still very good, what we call late in the down, Ross. In other words, they're not leaving the pocket, but they could stay in the pocket and they could make throws later in the down. In other words, it didn't always have to be the precise timing and rhythm. They didn't leave the pocket to do it, but they could do it from the pocket. But to your point, different coaches have different views about the inherent value of getting out of the pocket. There's a lot of coaches that believe that the NFL game is now such that to really become that guy, a top 4 or 5 guy in the league, that you have to be able to make those kinds of second reaction plays, because then you get into the playoffs and, you start playing, the better defenses. Sometimes they take things away. And that's happened with Tua at times. And there's a lot of people who believe that, hey, he's going to have to somehow try to get beyond that. We'll see if he can. They're a difficult offense to defend. There's no question about that. But he's certainly not a second reaction outside of structure, above the X's and O's, whatever term you want to use. That's not his game.
So one thing that I think was really interesting last week, Greg, you said to me that you would be very, very, very surprised if Sam Darnold doesn't start for the Minnesota Vikings, because J.J. McCarthy has a quote unquote, a lot to work on. I guess my question is, I feel like now that he's been with 3 teams, we kind of know what Sam Darnold is. Can you make the argument that if J.J. McCarthy has a lot to work on, that the Vikings would be better off if he was playing and working on it, as opposed to, I mean, what is it? How does it help you if you're the Vikings to have Sam Darnold start games? Or what are you going to do with Sam Darnold, especially in the same division with the Packers and Lions? What does that do for you? Maybe you win a couple more games, but shouldn't they start to see what they have in McCarthy and get him developed?
Well, again, that's a very individual question, Ross. That's easy from the outside for you and I or anybody else to say, oh, well, just play McCarthy. But, we don't know the specifics. I mean, I have a pretty good idea just because, people I've spoken to, but we don't know the specifics of what McCarthy is and isn't at this point. And you certainly don't want to put a young quarterback out there that's truly not ready to play. And it's not just a matter of making a mistake here and there, Ross, and you know this. I mean, you played in the league. If your quarterback can't really function for whatever reason, it could be physical, it could be mental. We don't, whatever reason, you can't really put him out there. I mean, the Vikings do not have a bad football team. While we know what Darnold is, you can still put Sam Darnold out there and compete. You can do that with McCarthy, the feeling seems to be that you can't right now. Now, obviously, they drafted him, I think it was 11th, if I'm not mistaken. So they expect him to be their starting quarterback. But my sense is, and even the tape tells you, that he has much to work on. Look, like I told you when we talked last week or the week before, I can't remember. I know coaches in the league that had a third-round grade on McCarthy. Now, obviously, he was drafted 11th, so the expectations become sky high, and they're different.
But, Greg, didn't he start every game for 3 years at Michigan? Like, if he's not ready,
2 years, I believe. Was it 3 years?
I thought he started as a true freshman, too. We can go back and check,
Yeah,
but certainly the last two.
I know he started for 2 years.
I thought he started a bunch as a true freshman. What does that say about Jim Harbaugh if he started that many college games and he's not ready?
That I can't speak to. I'm not there. And again, Jim Harbaugh's job is to win games, and he certainly did that pretty well, just winning a national championship. So, but as I said many times before, the tape with McCarthy, and by the way, McCarthy's another great example of a guy that has a very good arm if you just watch him throwing shorts in a t-shirt. But when you put him in a game and there's people around him, that all changes. So there's things that he needs to work on. They'll decide when he's ready, but I would doubt that he'd be the week one starter.
You also, I think, a couple weeks ago, Greg, had mentioned that you were talking with a coach about NFC quarterbacks, and you talked about who's the best NFC quarterback, and that you both right away said Stafford.
Yeah.
Is that so over guys like Goff or Hurts or Purdy? Do you feel confident in saying you think that Stafford's the best quarterback in the NFC, and why?
Yeah, I think Matthew Stafford's one of the most overlooked quarterbacks in the last decade, if not more. He is a high level talent. He's played really, really well. He obviously was on a bad team for years, so he was never talked about. But Stafford is incredibly intelligent, really talented. He's incredibly respected in the league. I mean, he's a really high-level traits quarterback, a high-level mental quarterback. He's just a really, really good quarterback. I mean, you talk to people in the league, and in their mind, he's a top 5 quarterback without question.
Wow, that is awesome. Great stuff, Greg. Always appreciate talking with you, whether it's here or on my show, the Ross Tucker Podcast. Check him out on social media, the NFL Films legend, 45 years breaking down the tape, back when it was actually tape.
That's correct.
In the 70s and 80s. At Greg Cosell. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Ross. Appreciate it.
That was today's Mercedes-Benz interview of the day, and it was brought to you by, surprise, surprise, Mercedes-Benz. Luxury SUVs now come with the luxury of choice. Mercedes-Benz has gas, electric, and plug-in hybrid offerings. Learn more about the E-Class SUVs at your local dealer or at mbusa.com/special offers.